Good morning and welcome to Community Roundtable, a free public service brought to you on AM 1590 KDJS. If you're a member of a nonprofit organization and would like to be featured on the program, call the KDJS Newsline at 320-235-2900. That's 320-235-2900.
It is Community Roundtable here on AM 1590 and FM 105.7. Al Sheldon here on your Sunday morning. Let us say hi to Stephanie Felt, Kandiyohi County Human Trafficking Task Force, and from Lutheran Social Services, Angie Mateski is with us today. Thank you, ladies, for coming in. This is an interesting topic that some people, as we mentioned before going on the air, are uncomfortable talking about: human trafficking. Stephanie, how do you nutshell that? What does that entail?
Well, human trafficking can involve both labor trafficking and sex trafficking. That's the umbrella that covers that. We're here today to talk about sex trafficking. And under that umbrella, we have both sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. So sex trafficking means that there's another person involved. There's another person forcing someone else to perform commercial sex acts, and then they're benefiting from that. Now, exploitation can mean that, say you have someone who's homeless and they just want a place to stay. And someone says, you can stay at my place, but then, now you have to earn that. Mm-hmm. Or someone's chemically addicted to, drugs or alcohol. Well, if you do this for me, I will give you, drugs or alcohol or money or whatever. So trafficking just means that there's that third party involved. Mm-hmm. So we do see both types of things happening within our community. So it's important because there is a huge misconception that's something that's just seen in the metro areas, and that's not the case. It really happens all throughout Minnesota and the nation and the world. So it's the third leading criminal enterprise besides drugs and illegal arms sales.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Something a lot of people don't realize, and it's something a lot of people might say, oh, that doesn't happen here.
Not in my backyard, right?
Yeah.
I think Angie will echo what I'm saying. People think, well, that's not something that happens here. And unfortunately, it does. But that's why we're getting together. The task force has about 19 different agencies involved, and we're all trying to figure out what each of our roles are and what our response is currently, how we take that up a level, and how we make sure that people don't slip through the cracks.
You mentioned Angie. Let's say hi to Angie Mateski with Lutheran Social Services. Angie, welcome to the studio here. You partner up with this program to help out. In what way?
Lutheran Social Services provides services for youth under the age of 24. So we have provided services to youth as young as 13 and as old as 24. Services are very individualized. It really depends on what the youth's need is at that time. We may help with housing. We may help with a job search. We may help connect someone up with some counseling or therapy. We may help them get in to see a medical doctor, things like that.
It's a wide topic. There are a lot of local partners, Stephanie, that you work with. Should we recognize some of the other people that help out when we talk about this topic?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to forget some, so please forgive me. But some of the key players are the Wilmer Police Department, Kandiyohi County Sheriff's Office. Obviously, law enforcement has a huge part to play. Child protection and social services. Lutheran Social Service and Safe Avenues are the people who provide services to the victims. So we have law enforcement working on the demand side, and we have victim advocates and victim support services handling the victim side. Because that's another thing to bring up too. So many times we get stuck on just focusing on victim. If we didn't have the demand, if we didn't have men wanting to buy sex, we wouldn't have victims. But as long as the demand is there, people are always going to try and find a way to fill that demand.
You mentioned Safe Avenues. One of our guests unable to be here due to, like many people, a little under the weather this time of the year. We've had that going around, but Casey Baker would have been here with you. Can you talk about Safe Avenues for a little bit?
Well, Safe Avenues, again, helps victims. They work with both victims of domestic violence and sexual violence, and of course trafficking and exploitation come under that sexual violence umbrella. So it's really great that we have both safe avenues in Lutheran Social Service, because between the two of them, it doesn't matter what age a victim is, there's somebody there to support them. And Angie had mentioned the helping anyone 24 under, and I want to reference that because that's what's called the safe harbor law. Because years ago, when you'd have someone who, say, is 18 years old and they get arrested for prostitution, they would get criminal consequences for that. But what we know now is whenever someone is involved in prostitution, they're a victim, because all of these cases overwhelmingly have somebody else forcing them to do that. I don't know if I hope I explained that well, because the misconception that gets very frustrating for me is like, well, yeah, I get it if it's a kid, but if somebody's over 18, they're an adult and it's their own decision. So what's the big deal? I get that a lot, and it's frustrating for us because we know, the average age entering into being trafficked is 12 to 14 years old, which it surprises a lot of people because that's quite young.
Yeah.
But you realize that when someone's been in this world, and keep in mind they've had a lot of physical and mental abuse happening to them just to keep them under control to keep doing this. Well, by the time they're 18, they can't really say, well, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm just going to go live somewhere else, get a normal job, get away from this person who, has been making me do this. It's very, very complicated because they're not going to have the job skills, and it's a dangerous situation because think about it. If you say you're someone who sells drugs, you always have to get that supply then to give out, to be able to sell it, right? But if you have a person, you can sell that person over and over again. And so when victims try to leave the life, is what they call it, it's a very, very dangerous situation for them because the person who is trafficking them doesn't want their money maker.
Yeah.
So a trafficker can have what they call it as a stable. So if they have 3 girls in their stable and they're making those girls fill a quota each week, they can make over $500,000 on those 3 girls.
Wow. Now, Minnesota, it says here, is the 13th largest in the country, the 13th largest area for human trafficking. A lot of people are not going to realize that. I did not realize that. Why is that? Other than there are buyers here to the tune of 26,000 men.
Right.
That just seems a lot. 13 out of 50 states?
Yeah, I don't really know how that is quantified. I do believe it, because we have the cities and there's a lot of traffic there, but we also are very proactive, so we're bringing in a lot. So I don't know if that's what they're basing that on. I can't really speak on that. I know that's a statistic that's thrown out there. But I think the thing to keep in mind is it is very prevalent. Again, when I was speaking with someone with a Not in My Backyard, certainly it's not helping, or it's not happening out here in Southwest Minnesota. Well, when Backpages was up and running, that's predominantly where most of the internet ads were placed. Now Backpages has been shut down, but it's the problem didn't go away. It just kind of scattered to a lot of other sites.
I hear about the corridor, like the I-94 corridor. Could you explain that?
Well, what happens is, in keeping with being able to control these victims, they don't keep them in one place very long because they don't want this victim thinking, oh, there's this place I can go that can help me and it'll keep me safe. Or, oh, I've made some friends and maybe I can run to them. They constantly keep them moving. So the major highways end up being almost circuits, if you will. So when we track the activity of some of these victims, they'll go, up through 94, they'll go through the Dakotas, they'll come down through, the middle of the United States and back up through Iowa and back into Minnesota, or whatever the case may be, however that particular trafficker has has outlets for these girls to work. They just constantly keep them moving, so they never really know where they're at. And it's pretty common for victims to say, yeah, I don't even know where I was yesterday. When they get picked up, they'll say, well, where did you come from? And they have no idea. So that's why we work with the hotel motel industry. So when clerks at the front desk, they can start to see some of these warning signs of, a young girl or two will come in with a quite a bit older man. And the girls won't say anything. They won't make eye contact. They're not wearing, weather appropriate clothing. And if you ask them, oh, where are you headed, or where are you coming from? Half the time they don't even know. So it's one of those, if you see something, say something, and that's a definite warning sign.
Yeah, kind of answering my next question here as we go along. How do you know what to look for? And those are some great clues. Angie, something to add to that, or?
Do you? I don't want to do all the time. I tell you what, I tease her because she's boots on the ground. And really what makes people vulnerable to this is if they have an addiction, if they're homeless, if they're a runaway. And Lutheran Social Service really helps fill that. It's a place for people if you are a runaway, if you are homeless, if you're a youth that just needs somewhere to kind of, what do I want to say, regroup or get some options.
Find some support.
Figure out what your options are. And so to help take some of that vulnerability away, because if someone who, legitimately wants to help them doesn't help them, someone who's pretending to care about them is going to, pretend to help them. So I've talked so much, I kind of forgot what the whole question. Oh, the warning signs. So, you want to look for, especially in the healthcare industry too, we tell people if someone doesn't even have control of their own like driver's license, they don't carry their own identification on them, if they're a lot of times malnourished, they're going to be they're not going to make eye contact with you. They're going to be, help me out, Angie, if you're thinking of any, but very much kind of, they're going to be an abuse victim, basically. So the really difficult thing for service providers is none of the victims, though, I shouldn't say none, but most victims don't identify as victims. So they'll say, well, this is my boyfriend.
Yeah.
And, I love him. And it's kind of that real power and control dynamic that we see in domestic abuse situations.
So it's a tough call, whether you're a front desk clerk at a hotel or somebody at a store or a gas station, or you see something odd. Let's say you want to report something. How do you do that? Are you going to call 911, or what do you do?
Yeah, it's really hard to kind of like, what is your line of, do we call this in, do we not? But I always say, trust your gut, because your gut is going to say something isn't right here. And it's better to call something in than not. So the non-emergency line for Wilmer PD is 235-2244. So you can always say, I'm not sure if this is something, but this is what I'm seeing. Yeah. And I think something's going on there. And Angie can talk about their 24-hour line.
Absolutely. Well, another thing I'd like to add to that, Stephanie, is there's something to be said for prevention also. So I don't think you need to wait until you have that gut feeling. If something's wrong, see what you can do to help. I'm thinking of youth who maybe don't have a stable living condition, youth that are bouncing home to home, or people suspect are homeless. That would be a situation where you'd want to, I think, reach out and look for help, because that's going to help prevent some of that trafficking and exploitation that we see. Our non-emergency line, our 24-hour line is 320-444-0512. That phone is answered 24 hours a day, 365 days a year by one of our staff members, and we will do everything we can to get the appropriate assistance and get that youth some support as fast as possible.
How big is Lutheran Social Services locally? A lot of people there with a lot of different avenues that the service gets into then, or?
Absolutely. So we're youth programs. We have several other programs within LSS here in Wilmer. Our programs are youth programs. So we are providing programs for youth that are runaway homeless, youth that are pregnant and parenting, youth who've experienced some sort of out-of-home placement, and youth who have been trafficked or exploited. So,
it's huge local support that we're talking about here. And Stephanie, with the local task force, how big is that?
Well, like I say, there's about 19 agencies represented, so it's a very big task force when we get around the table. And we receive funding from the Wilmer Women's Fund to create countywide response protocols. So that is one hat that I wear. And then also we received some funding from the Office of Justice Programs through the County Attorney's Office to train law enforcement and prosecution on identification and response. So,
and January is a special month here, right?
Yep, it's Trafficking Awareness Month. And, people just think of trafficking as a form of slavery. I mean, that's kind of a term that's easier for people to kind of grasp. And it's this person that's being trafficked has no control over where they go or what they're able to do, even when they eat or when they're able to sleep. So, we had one gal that was posted up locally over on Christmas Eve. And I think, let's stop and think. These victims, they don't get a day off. They don't get any rest because they're making money for someone.
Are the laws in Minnesota pretty tough on trafficking? And is it hard to prove a case?
Well, Minnesota, thankfully, isn't as strict as the federal law, because in Minnesota, you don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. So even if someone is tricked into it, if someone, you don't have to prove that someone's getting regular beatings or, show a physical injury. You can all you have to prove is that someone is, posting an ad that you can buy this person. They're transporting them to a place to be bought or sold. So, really, if you're involved at all as a third party, you can be charged with that.
Now, when you say post an ad,
yep,
are you talking internet or newspaper? Or how do you do it?
Newspaper, is no longer something that's used. And I don't want people just thinking that this is only a website. There's a lot of adult websites out there. There's so many. It's pretty nauseating, frankly. And when Backpages got shut down, remember I mentioned all these escort sites or they're basically selling sex, but it just scattered to a whole number of them. So now law enforcement has to monitor many, many, many sites to see when there's activity happening and on what sites. And I think, as everyone knows, as soon as you get savvy on trying to figure out one part of technology, something else pops up and you're just constantly behind. So what they're seeing is not only website ads, but also social media apps. So dating apps, there's a lot of things that happen over the smartphone, which we really try to educate, and Safe Avenues and Lutheran Social Service does a great job of educating youth, because it's very easy for a teen to be mad at their parents and jump on some sort of social media site and say, my parents are stupid, I hate them. And then somebody picks up on that and says, oh, that's tough. I would never do that. And hey, why don't we meet up and I'll buy you some stuff and I'll be this perfect boyfriend. And that doesn't happen overnight. It's a grooming process. But kids, they're naive and they get tricked into this kind of thing. So another warning site, going back to our previous conversation, was sometimes it's a warning when these kids who wouldn't have another means to do it, they show up with new phones, they show up with new clothes, they show up with fancy stuff that you don't know where it's coming from. Sometimes that's something we see in schools. It's part of that grooming process.
Yeah. Wow. I'm in the boat here where I didn't understand half of this, of what you're talking about that was going on. It's hard to believe. Are there a lot of convictions once someone is caught? A pretty good rate of somebody getting locked up or whatever? What all happens,
Well, like I say, we received a grant from the Office of Justice Programs for that very thing. How do we go through this process? Because for us as a Regency, it's a relatively new thing, and we're trafficking isn't, but attacking the problem is. So we're learning as we go, and for obvious reasons, law enforcement needs to keep a lot of things close to the chest as far as how they go about that. And for prosecutions, that's something where as law enforcement starts bringing people in, it remains to be seen. But the buyers, I think it's interesting for people to know, too, that, sometimes you'll see a scruffy looking, person that you stereotypically think, oh, that guy must be, a drug dealer or whatever. And you have to think with a typical sex buyer, they're going to be a white male. They're going to be between the ages of about 30 and 60. And they're going to have disposable income. Most of the time, they're well respected within their own communities, and they're married with children. And what they do is they'll travel 30 to 60 miles, so they're not to keep that anonymity. So when we have, what I have seen is that when law enforcement tries to see who's out there buying our local people. I'm not sure how to phrase this properly, but they're coming from about an hour away, usually.
Wow. So to back into the courtroom here, then somebody gets caught, then we go into the hands of the county attorney, and they represent the prosecution and bring the case forward, just thinking of the process here,
Right. Yeah, I really can't speak on that because we need to start bringing in the cases to start trying. So,
yeah, boy, what a topic! You said before going on the air, it's not an easy thing for a lot of people to even want to hear or talk about. And we appreciate anybody who's tuned in this morning to understand this just a little bit more. Again, Minnesota's statistics are a little bit staggering when you think about it.
Right.
Something that myself included, had no idea of how busy the state can be in this illegal activity,
Go ahead.
We've been talking a lot about trafficking, and I just want to remind everyone that under this umbrella is also the exploitation. And exploitation can include survival sex, stripping, pornography, and child solicitation, not just the third-party trafficking.
Wow.
Do you want to explain survival sex, what that means?
As you mentioned earlier, Stephanie, survival sex is when someone is trading something of value for a sex act. So it may be drugs, it may be a place to stay, it may be a meal for some of the youth that we work with that haven't eaten in a day or two. And oftentimes it's not as simple and forthright as, if you do this, I will provide this. Oftentimes a youth finds themselves in a situation where someone says, sure, you can stay at my house. They are there a few days. The person's feeding them. The first person's doing their laundry, maybe has purchased them some clothing. And after a few days, the person will come back and say, well, I've done all of this for you. Now you owe me this.
It's just crazy to think that goes on. This sounds like an episode of Criminal Minds on TV or something,
Well, and when you look at, how much we're seeing of what exploitation is actually a bigger percentage of what does happen here locally as far as, this type of crime. Because we have a lot of kids that don't have a place to stay, and they call it couch surfing. And they just, who's going to give me a roof to stay under? And it's hard for a lot of us to think, oh my goodness, why wouldn't a kid have a place to stay? But there's a lot of kids out there.
Another thing that, if you missed it earlier, that surprises me, I guess, lack of knowledge on my part, how young the kids are that get persuaded to come with somebody and get into this line of whatever you want to call it. 12 to 14 years old, huh?
You have to remember, too, the younger someone is, the easier it is to manipulate them. And unfortunately, with boys, it's actually a little bit younger, sadly. So that's why it's really important to, touch base, to know what they're doing online, know what they're doing on their phone, and just have that connection. And if you suspect another child to be in trouble or needing help or whatever, I would encourage people to call Lutheran Social Service or call Safe Avenues or call that, that non-emergency number for PD and start someone into looking into what's going on if possible. So,
you look at the safe places to stay. Once someone says, I have to get out of this, there might be somebody after me. That's got to be a lot of work on your end as far as the protection part. I guess somebody needs to hide, stay safe from somebody who may be knocking on the door, wanting to chase them down.
Yeah, I mean, Angie can speak on this too, but there's a real concern when someone says, oh, this is happening to this person, so I'll just keep her at my house or I'll protect her, whatever. Safety planning is a huge component of this because, like we say, whoever's making money off this person is going to want them back.
Right.
And it's a big safety concern. So when someone stays out at Safe Avenues, there's a reason why that all stays confidential, and they're not going to tell you if someone is there or not, type of deal. I don't know if you want to add to any of this, Angie.
I think that the piece I would add would be that's a place where we would really rely on the police department and work closely with social services when it's a young person under the age of 18 to ensure that we can help that young person stay safe.
All right. One other thing here, Bush, I'm looking at my time. I told you this half hour would go really fast, okay? But a little thing here kind of stands out to me. Every month in Minnesota, 213 girls are sold for sex through the internet and escort services in Minnesota. 213 a month. And we have, 87 counties?
Yep.
And, of course, we've got the metro where things are a lot more population count. But still, that's just a way too big of a number, And
I think that's low. And Angie's nodding her head yes. Just because those are the ones they can kind of count. Mm-hmm. There's so much that kind of happens below the radar. There's also the groups that actually go through word of mouth. So people will know, if you go to this house, you're able to buy a child. And it's never posted up on social media. It's never posted on the internet. So I'm not trying to paint a horribly bleak picture. What I'm trying to say is it does happen, and as a community, if we all pull together and make sure we, as a community say, we're not going to allow this to happen. If we see something, the other thing is we're all Minnesota nice and we don't want to bother anybody and we want to mind our own business. But really, a crime like this goes after our most vulnerable citizens, right? So we need to make sure that we do step in and make a phone call and, just make sure if our gut tells us something is off, let's do some more digging and try to find help for that person.
Yeah, step up. And the old adage, if you see something, say something. Mm-hmm. That's good in any line of illegal activity, as we've talked about. To wrap up here, Angie, you're pointing down here. What you got?
I also just wanted to mention that our emergency number is 320-444-0512, and that serves youth 24 and under. However, Safe Avenues also has an emergency number that will serve folks of any age. Their number is 800-792-4210.
Very good. And Stephanie, a final word for you?
Well, keep in mind, if something is an emergency and something is going on that somebody needs to address immediately, go ahead and call 911. If it turns out that it was nothing or you were mistaken, that's okay. But we just rather err on the side of being cautious. So,
exactly.
Or the non-emergency number of 235-2244. But
all right. Well, very good. Gosh, thanks for coming in. We wish Casey could have been here with us. Next time we'll have her healthy and in the studio also,
exactly.
Right?
Thanks for having us.
All right. I've been talking with Stephanie and Angie once again. Stephanie Felt, Angie Mateski. And like safe, see something, say something. We'll end it on that note. All right. And you've been listening to Community Roundtable. We'll be back next Sunday morning at 7:30.
You've been listening to Community Roundtable, a free public service brought to you on AM 1590 KDJS. If you're a member of a nonprofit organization, you've been listening to Community Roundtable, a free public service brought to you on AM 1590 KDJS. If you're a member of a nonprofit organization and would like to be featured on the program, call the KDJS Newsline at 320-235-2900. That's 320-235-2900. And would like to be featured on the program, call the KDJS Newsline at 320-235-2900. That's 320-235-2900.